Hello. How's everyone doing? Let me know how the audio is because lately I've had bad audio and I don't know why. So please let me know what my audio is like. Happy birthday, Dee Dee. Hope you're having a good day. I love you. Happy birthday. It's probably not over here because I think Foxanna is just finishing up right now. Okay, I sound good. Well, Steven will fix it if I sound bad. That's his job. We can't do this without him. So, tonight's topic is alternation of generations. But before we get into that, I have something to show you. So, let me pull it up. I got in something really, really cool today. I got in some new fish from Dan's Fish. Can you see them? They're eels. Oh, I can't play the video. Well, you can see the still of it. These are my new eels. I got 4 of them. They're so cute. They're red-tailed eels. They're still settling in. They're still coloring up. I put some pictures on the Discord server so everybody can see them. They're about 3 inches right now. Apparently, they'll get 6 inches. They are an uncharacterized species of Macronathus. Don't really know a lot about them, but they're just so cute. They're just so cute and wiggly. So, yeah, I'm pretty happy I got them. I wanted to get them the first time around that they were offered, and I hemmed and hawed too much, and they sold out like that. But they were offered again, and I was able to get them. So I have 4 of them. So, and they're in my 90. They're over here. I can see, if I look, I think I can see one of them right now, but they're still hiding. They're still settling in. So, anyways, those are my new eels. So, let's start into the topic. Let's see. Dun, dun, dun. Today we are talking about alternation of generations. What does it even mean? Oh my goodness. So, alternation of generation is all about life cycles. So you are very familiar with one life cycle because it is the life cycle that animals do. But other organisms on Earth, other multicellular organisms, employ different strategies. And those strategies are very exciting. And so we'll talk about what some of those strategies are. And we'll talk about some of the organisms that do it. Some of them are very familiar to you. And we'll talk a little bit about why they do something different and why we don't. So, it's kind of a cool topic, but this is what you are familiar with. So, we are diploid organisms. So that means we have 2 sets of chromosomes. We got 1 set of chromosome from mom and 1 set of chromosome from our dad. So we have 23 pairs of chromosomes, 46 total. So sometimes you'll see that written as 2N. That means diploid. Okay. And throughout our lifetime, most of the cell division that we're doing is called mitosis. And what mitosis does is it divides cells and it preserves the chromosome number. It preserves the ploidy. So if you start with the diploid cell and you do mitosis, you get more diploid cells. Okay. If you started with a haploid cell, which is where you have half the number of chromosomes, you'd get a haploid. You would get another haploid cell. But humans, they don't do that. Okay, most of our life we're doing mitosis and mitosis and mitosis. So when you grow bigger, those cells are dividing by mitosis. When you have an injury and it's repairing, those cells are dividing by mitosis. If you are, the lining of the inside of your cheeks every day, okay, you're generating new cells every day, and that's by mitosis. But there are some specialized cells in your body that are generated by meiosis, and those are the gametes. So they're sex cells, sperm and egg. Those are made by meiosis. And then these are haploid cells. They have 23 in them and not 46, because meiosis, what it does is it reduces the number of chromosomes by half. Okay, so you started with 46 and you end up with 23. So 23 in an egg, 23 in a sperm. If you put them together in fertilization, you get a diploid, and it's the zygote. Okay, and that grows up and it turns into an adult, and that's by mitosis. So you're very familiar with this life cycle, because with few exceptions, this is what all animals do. But other organisms, they do something called alternation of generations. So if we're to start with a diploid, whoops, come back. Ah! Okay, where's my cursor? There it is. If we started with a diploid here, so this is a diploid organism on the bottom, the sporophyte. Okay, you're making more cells by mitosis. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And by meiosis, it's making something called spores. Okay, but instead of just unifying and fertilizing and coming together, those haploid cells, they grow up into another multicellular organism called a gametophyte. Okay, and they divide and they divide and they divide, but at some point, the gametophyte will produce the gametes. So those will be sperm and egg in most cases. And those will come together by fertilization, and they will make a zygote, a 2N cell, and this will repeat. So this is something very different than what we do. So this would be like, what if the sperm cells, instead of just fertilizing the egg, what if they grew up into a whole nother organism? I mean, how weird would that be? I mean, that would make you really think twice about what you do with your sperm. Very different strategy. But this strategy is very common, because this is what fungi do. This is what algae do. And this is what plants do. Some variation of alternation of generations, but with slightly different flavors. So I'll show you what some of those are. So this is the organism I did my PhD on. So this is yeast. This is the yeast that you would use to bake bread. So, or brew beer or make wine. So yeast it'll grow usually as a haploid. So one copy of the chromosomes. And yeast actually has two sexes, and they're called A and alpha, and they look no different. And maybe sometime I'll tell you about, we'll do a whole topic on sex determination, because it's pretty interesting actually. But these will just grow up, and they will grow, it's called growing vegetatively. But what they're doing is they're just doing mitosis and mitosis and mitosis and mitosis, and growing along and growing along and growing along and growing along. But at some point, if an A cell encounters an alpha cell, they can fertilize. So this has a fun name. So the yeast cell here will actually, it'll put forward like a little projection. It's called a shmoo, because if you look up Shmoo, the cartoon, that's the shape it makes. So the yeast scientists, they called it that. I've been to many serious talks on schmooing, very serious, and it's just hard to keep a straight face when you listen to that. But what's happening here is you're having a union of the A and the alpha, they're haploids, and that's going to make a diploid. And they can grow along by mitosis and mitosis and mitosis and mitosis and mitosis and mitosis and mitosis. But at some point, they can do meiosis, and that diploid will become a haploid. And you get you get spores. So you get 4 spores in a sac, and each of those are 1N. They're haploids, 4 haploid spores. And this is what I did my whole PhD on, was meiosis, by the way. Just so much sporulating of yeast cells. But what actually triggers them to do meiosis, because they're pretty happy growing vegetatively, and these are single-celled organisms. A diploid and a haploid in yeast look no different. Okay. And they never form a multicellular organism, they're always unicellular. But what triggers them to do this is actually times of stress. So when they're stressed for either carbon, so glucose, if they're stressed for glucose, or they're stressed for nitrogen, um, it will trigger them to go into meiosis. So, and we'll talk a little bit about why they might do that in a little bit. So, multicellular fungi do the same thing. So, this is a common mushroom. So, anytime you see a mushroom growing, the mushroom is it's a that's a sporophyte. So it's creating the spores, and then the spores can germinate. And then underneath the ground are hyphae, or it's also known as mycelium. It forms like long kind of spaghetti mats. And these are all haploid cells. And the haploid below the ground is so much bigger than the fruiting body above the ground. So there's actually the biggest organism on Earth is a haploid mycelium of fungi, and it's in Michigan, and it's like it's like several square miles big. It's huge, and it's all below the ground. But there are certain things, certain conditions of the weather or stress or maybe rain or something that will trigger them to send up a fruiting body like this that's going to, through meiosis, make spores that are haploid, and then these will germinate. And these hyphae will make gametes through mitosis that will unify to make the fruiting body. So that's how fungi do it, but algae do it too. So this is a seaweed. This is a brown algae. Um, it's what you're mostly seeing on the beach is the sporophyte generation. And it'll grow and grow and grow, and it can just multiply and multiply and multiply. But at some point, something will trigger it to go sexual. Um, and it's usually being starved for some nutrient or excess of nutrient. Something is making the environment unstable and unhappy. And so it's going to do meiosis, and it's going to make spores, and it's going to make lots of them and just release them into the water column. And it has these organs that form at the tips. They're called sporangia. Plural of that is so singular sporangium, plural is sporangia, and those get released into the water column, and they will actually germinate, and they'll form kind of like a hyphae that's really small and not very noticeable. And it will make gametes by mitosis, and these will get released into the open water, sperm and eggs, and they'll unify. They'll fertilize the two of them, and then those will grow up into the sporophyte generation, which is the dominant form of the brown algae. So there's also unicellular algae too. And there's many other kinds of algae. There's lots of species of algae, and they're evolutionarily quite diverged. They're not closely related, and they do some variation of alternation of generations too. So they don't do a life cycle like we do. So we would not have this whole pink portion here. This is not a thing we do. There's no multicellular haploid stage for animals. It's with some minor exceptions, but this is just not a thing we do. We don't alternate our generations, but algae do it, fungi do it, and also all plants do it to some degree. So this is a moss. So this is a picture of a terrestrial moss, but the moss in your aquarium are doing this as well. So the dominant form that you're seeing in your tank right here is actually the gametophyte generation, and it's haploid. So all the mossy leafy part, that's actually they only have one set of chromosomes. So they don't have two sets. They're not living diploid lives. And the only part of their life cycle that is diploid, they send up these sporophytes. And this is what the sporophytes look like. And if you go walking in the woods, you've probably seen something that looks like this. The sporophyte generation will release spores through meiosis. And that's the only part that's diploid. The dominant form is actually haploid. And there's really a trend in plants that um the more modern a plant is, it tends to have a dominant sporophyte generation, and the more ancient a plant is, tends to have a more prominent gametophyte generation. So that just means that older plants spend more time as haploids, and more modern plants spend pretty much their entire lives as diploids. So that's just a trend toward diploidy as the dominant generation. And there's some reasons for that that we'll talk about in a little bit. But mosses are very primitive plants. They're very ancient. So they actually have no true vascularization. So that's why they never get very big. And the leaves are only a couple of cells thick. And that's because they have no tissues for transporting water or the products of photosynthesis. So they can never get very big, and that's why they always have to be damp, because they have no vasculature. So a tree, it grows so tall up in the air, and up in the air, unless it's raining, is really far from a damp environment, right? It can be really dry, but it's taking water from the ground, like even really deep in the ground, and pulling it up through its vasculature. But mosses can't do that because they don't have any true vasculature. So mosses always have to be pretty damp. And this is true of all of these ancient plants. They're very reliant on damp environments. You're never going to see a desert moss. That's just not a thing that exists. So that's how mosses do it. So these are liverworts. Liverworts are also a pretty old kind of plant. And liverworts also have a dominant gametophyte generation. So when you're walking in the woods and you see something that looks like this is a haploid. It has only one set of chromosomes, and this is actually a gametophyte. So they're very cool sort of plants. And they actually get these little cups on them. And these cups are for asexual reproduction. So these are not for sexual reproduction at all. They're called gemma cups. And when it rains, they'll splash in these little cups and come back. And some of the cells will splash out of the cups. And they can splash into a new little next door piece of soil that doesn't have a liverwort on it yet. So those little splash cups help propagate the plant a little bit. They look kind of weird though, I have to admit. So, but the gametophyte generation through mitosis, it can actually make a female gametophyte and a male gametophyte. And so they're making by mitosis sperm and eggs. And sperm and eggs are always haploid cells, okay, just like in humans. And those can unify and they can form a sporophyte, generate the sporophyte. So they can form this that makes the spores. So this is the sporophytes right here on the very tip. And so it's not a dominant part of the life cycle. The dominant part is this leafy looking thing, the thallus, and that's a gametophyte. So it's still dominant gametophyte, but with maybe a little bit more sporophyte than a moss is. So if you're hiking in the woods and you see this, this is part of sexual reproduction of the liverwort. But these little splash cups, that's part of asexual reproduction. And this can just creep along as long as there's adequate moisture and habitat. And, it's pretty happy. It will just keep growing that thallus bigger and bigger and covering, that little piece of ground. But if it's kind of unhappy, it might decide to send some spores out. And the thing about spores is they're dried down and the wind can blow them away pretty far. So it can populate new habitats that way. And that's kind of the point of these spores is they can disseminate really well. Whereas for gametes, they have to swim through the water. So it's reliant on water for that. So, and liverworts also have no true vasculature. They don't have any vessels. They're always found in damp environments. You're never going to find a desert liverwort. It's just not a thing. But you'll see them when you walk in the woods. And we even have some in our aquariums. This is not a very commonly available plant, but if you've ever heard of it used to be called Pellia, now it's called Ricardia. This is a liverwort. And you can see these are the gametophytes. So these are all haploid cells, and it's just growing and growing and growing and growing. And I've never seen them send up a sporophyte generation. I don't know what that would look like. I don't know if that would ever happen in a fully submersed environment. I don't know if that's a thing. I have grown Pellia, but it's been so long. It's been a very long time. But anyways, that's Ricardia. Sometimes it's called Ricardia moss, but it's not a moss. It's a liverwort. So, and then ferns. So ferns, now these have true vessels. So they can transport water from their roots and bring it up into their leaves. And that's why ferns are much bigger. They're much, much bigger than liverworts and mosses are, because they have these true vessels. They are still reliant on damp environments because they're making gametes that swim. So they have alternation of generation, but they spend the dominant form of their life is not the gametophyte, it's the sporophyte. So it's the diploid. So when you find a fern in the woods or your Java ferns in your tank, this is a sporophyte. And so this is a sporophyte. It's pretty big, but there was a time in its life when it made this little teeny tiny gametophyte, and it looks kind of like a liverwort, and it doesn't even have true vasculature, and it's haploid. This is a part of its life cycle. I mean, I've maybe seen fern gametophytes walking in the woods and not even realized it. Maybe I thought they were liverworts, or maybe I didn't see them at all. They're so tiny. So this is a sword fern, which is something that you can find in the woods. It's pretty common. The leaves get, I think, about like a couple feet. The fronds will get like a couple feet, maybe. Pretty big. But I don't think I would even notice the gametophyte. So, but what it does for its lifestyle is it has a stage where the spores germinate. The spores are always haploid, and by mitosis, the cells divide and they divide and they divide and they divide, and they make this little gametophyte, and then it will pinch off some cells through mitosis that are haploid, because mitosis of a haploid makes more haploid cells. And they are sperm and eggs, and they'll unify, and these will grow up into the sporophyte generation. And the sporophyte generation is the dominant generation of this, and it makes the spores in these structures on the leaf called sporangia. Sometimes they're also called sori, S-O-R-I. And if you look at the back of a fern, this is what they are. You'll see these. You might think, oh my God, there's like some bug eggs on my fern. But no, that's very healthy. That's normal. That's just where it's making spores by meiosis. So the spores that it makes are haploid. So the sporophyte makes the spores. The sporophyte is the big ferny looking thing, and it makes haploid spores. So I've even seen these on the back of my Java fern leaves before. They're kind of black dots. And it's a normal thing. Your plant is not unhealthy. So yeah, that's a typical fern lifestyle. There's actually some weirdos of ferns. So this is Sosvasotong. This is actually a fern, but it's a fern gametophyte. And it's actually kind of frozen in the gametophyte stage. So at least from what I've read, there are no reported Sosvasotong. I love saying that, by the way. Sosvasotong. So fun to say. There's no reported sporophytes of this. So this is just always reproducing vegetatively. It's not doing any sexual reproduction that anyone has seen. So it's just this is all just those little gametophytes that look kind of like liverworts. And I actually thought it was a liverwort because they used to think it was a liverwort, but no, it is actually a fern. It's a fern gametophyte. So that's Wassertang, which in German I think means like freshwater weed or something, like freshwater seaweed or something. You might see it written as like SUB, Wassertang, but it's that weird looking German B is pronounced SS, like that. So it's Wassertang. It's so fun to say that. Like, I encourage you to just like right now say it a bunch of times and like annoy your children. Wassertang. All right, so last I'm going to tell you about how angiosperms do it. So angiosperms are most of the plants on Earth. These are vascular plants that make true flowers. So flowering plants, trees, like most of the trees, not conifers, but like oak trees, apple trees, bacopa in your aquarium, rotalas in your aquarium. I mean, name a plant, it is most likely an angiosperm. Corn is an angiosperm. Soybeans an angiosperm. Kale, the worst plant, that's an angiosperm. So these are true flowering plants. They have alternation of generations too, but it is a very, very dominant sporophyte generation. There is almost no gametophyte generation, but it is still there. So, flowers have male parts and female parts. Sometimes they're in the same flower, sometimes they're in separate flowers, sometimes they're on separate plants. If it's a perfect flower, it's going to have all of the parts. So if you're looking from the outside to the inside, so this is a sepal, and that's just like a leafy covering for the flower. And the next you have the petals. And the purpose of the petal is just to attract pollinators. They're showy, they smell good, they're pretty, but they're not actually involved in the sexual reproduction. Then you have the anthers. I'm not pointing to the right thing. How about that? Okay, then you have the anthers, and this is the part of the plant, the male part of the plant, and it makes the pollen. And then in the middle you have the stigma, and the stigma has the female part of the plant. Okay, this is all sporophyte, and by meiosis it's making spores in the stamens, the male part, and it's making an ovule, which is the female gametophyte, in the pistil. Okay, so if we follow down the right side of this, this is the microsporangium, the anther. By meiosis, it's making spores, and it's just dividing. These are pollen grains, okay, with a couple of cell divisions, just a couple. You get a pollen grain, and that's what these look like here. They're very pretty. Pollen grains are very pretty. And these actually, when you pollinate a plant, so either an insect does it, or you do it, or the wind does it, the pollen will reach the female part of the plant, the pistil, and it will germinate. And this is the gametophyte right here. This is the male gametophyte. It will germinate, and it will send a tube down to fertilize the female part of the plant. So this pollen tube right here, I'm showing one right here. This is actually the whole gametophyte generation. So it's a pretty insignificant part of the life of the plant. Still very important. It's important for reproduction. But when you think of a tree, you're not really thinking of the gametophyte. You're thinking of the sporophyte, because the sporophyte is so dominant with flowering plants. So this pollen tube can get pretty big, because it's got to be big enough to go all the way down the pistil, so the female part of the plant. So if you know anything about corn, which I'm from Iowa, so I know lots about corn, the silks of the corn. So if you've ever bought a corn on the cob and you shuck it, they're those long silky things. So what those are those are long, long pistils. So that's the long female reproductive part of the plant, and the pollen tube has to actually grow all the way down that it's like almost 12 inches that it has to grow to reach the bottom, and then it will reach a sperm, release a sperm at the bottom of that that can pollinate the female gametophyte. Which, if you think, come back, if you think the male gametophyte is minor in a flowering plant, the female gametophyte is even tinier. It makes this thing called an ovule, which is just 8 cells, 2 cell divisions. That's it. That is the entire female gametophyte. And the pollen tube will release a sperm that will fertilize one of those nuclei. And it's a little more complicated than that, actually, but we won't go into that. But that's the lifestyle they use. So, last thing I want to talk about a little bit is like, why even do this? Why do all this rigmarole of alternating generations? And like, why don't animals do it? So, to think about that, you have to think about what the advantages are of being diploid as opposed to haploid. So, if you're a diploid, it means, I'm going to escape out of this and put me back in. There we go. Okay. So what's the advantages of being a diploid? So we are diploids. We live our whole lives as diploids. We got one copy of our chromosomes from mom, and we got one copy from dad. So we have 2 of every gene. So, but there are some plants that are growing around that only have one copy of a gene. So the advantage of being a diploid is that you have a backup copy of all your genes. And if one of them gets damaged in a cell, you've got another one that's probably okay. And if you think about most, like, I'm sure you guys know a lot of genetic conditions in humans that are homozygous, recessive, either lethal or bad, deleterious, we would say. So they're bad. So for instance, let's, cystic fibrosis. Okay. You need 2 bad copies of that to get cystic fibrosis, but you're just fine if you only have one bad copy. You're okay. So you have heterozygote advantage. And so you have coverage for that. And if you get one copy mutated in a cell, it's just fine. And it can also use the good copy. The cell can use the good copy to fix the bad copy. So there's a lot of advantages to being a diploid. So why even bother having this haploid generation, that grows up? What's the advantage of that? Well, it's a good way to purge bad alleles from a population. So what do I mean by that? Well, since most genetic conditions can get covered by a good copy, you get a lot of these bad recessive alleles persisting in a population. So I bet some of you may even be carriers for cystic fibrosis and you don't even know it. You wouldn't know it unless you had children with another person who was a carrier for cystic fibrosis and you happen to have a child who had it. So on average, we have I think it's 6 or 7 bad recessive alleles, and we don't even know it. So, but if there's a generation that's haploid and they have to grow with only one copy, anything that's lethal, it's going to die. It's going to be purged from the population, and that makes the population healthier overall. So, that's one reason why they do it. And so why don't why don't animals do it? Well, a lot of plants are something called polyploid, which means they naturally have lots and lots and lots of copies of a chromosome. So strawberries are kind of a famous example. So, back in like the 30s and 40s, strawberries were really, really teeny, teeny, tiny. And now strawberries are, gosh, they're just huge, right? That's because they're polyploids. So they have multiple sets of chromosomes in a cell, and they're living along just fine that way. And so even if you have a haploid generation of a plant, there's still copies that it can use to fix DNA so it can, use it for repair. So that's maybe why that happens. But animals just do it different than these other multicellular plants. So it's just kind of cool to know the different lifestyles that different organisms on Earth are engaging in. There's not just one way to make a multicellular organism. So anyways, I think that's about all I have to say about that. If you have any questions, let me know. But let's scroll back and look at the chat because I'm way behind. Good to see everybody. Hopefully, my audio is still good. If it's not, hopefully, Steven fixed it. Thank you, Eric. I love my new eels. They're very cute. I'm very excited to watch them color up. I'm very excited to watch them be more active. I don't know if they'll be more active at night or during the day. I don't really know much about them. So, but I do, I watch them eat some extreme krill flakes. So it looks like they'll eat regular prepared food. So I don't need to just feed them bloodworms, which is good because I could try to feed them bloodworms, but there's rainbows in that tank. They're not going to let a single bloodworm get to the bottom. So it's a good thing they can eat some flake. All right. Big Cat says, hey, everybody, can't wait to learn what this topic even means. I know. And now you know. And knowing is half the battle. I mean, was it like GoBots who said that, or G.I. Joe? I don't even know. I didn't watch those boy cartoons. So, da-dum. Lady Rorschach will be in chat soon. She's finishing some shrimp salads. That sounds delicious. I had French onion soup for dinner. I've had a stash of French onion soup in the freezer that I've been gradually working on, and now it's gone. I'm sad. I'll have to make more. Happy birthday, Dee Dee! Fat Kitty. Where did Fat Kitty go? He was looking at my fish earlier. He was sitting on this chair looking at them. But I don't know where he went. I mean, he's on his cat business, so maybe he'll come by. Dun, dun, dun. All right, Sketty notices. So yeast is all good until it smooths all over your skin. So this kind of yeast is not the kind that is infectious. So there's a different yeast called Candida albicans, which is the kind of yeast that causes yeast infections or thrush or like vaginal yeast infections. That's caused by Candida albicans. And it is not even closely related to baker's yeast. It is farther apart evolutionarily than animals are from insects, or than humans are from insects. Let's put it that way. They're very, very diverged, but they still have a similar lifestyle to that kind of yeast. They do alternation of generations. They have they have a hyphal. I think they actually can form hyphae. I know a little bit about them, but not a ton. There was a guy in my PhD department, or my biology department I got my degree in, who worked on Candida albicans, but I didn't like to go to their talks because they had lots of gross pictures of yeast infections in them, and I don't need that in my life. So, oh, thought Lady R didn't love me no more. Lady R is filled with love. She still loves you. One organism that big. Wow. I don't know what organism you're talking about, but you're talking about the yeah. I'll have to look that up. It's in Michigan. There might be a bigger one by now, but a smaller example of that is if you've ever seen mushrooms growing in a fairy ring, like you'll see a ring of mushrooms. So they grow like that because underneath the ground is the big hyphae. So the big mycelial mass of that, and then it just sends up the fruiting bodies, the mushrooms at the edges of that. And so that's why they grow in a ring. And every year the ring will get a little bigger and a little bigger. So it's not caused by magic. It's caused because most of the organism is underground. So yeah, pretty cool. Something makes it go sexual. Perfect timing for me to enter the chat. It's true. So, and I didn't talk much about that. So, what's the purpose of sex, anyways? So, when you're a geneticist, you talk a lot about sex. But really, if you're a geneticist, all you care about sex is meiosis and fertilization. Nothing else matters. It's just what happens with the cells. But why do sex? So, sex gives you new combinations of genes. So, if you think about, you're a mix of your mom and your dad, right? Not a perfect mix. Otherwise, you and your siblings would look exactly alike, right? So maybe you have one of your siblings has blue eyes. My sister has curly hair. We look a little different. And that's because during sex, there's something called recombination happening, which gives new combinations of genes. And a lot of these organisms do sex in response to harsh environmental conditions. So when times are tough, they're making these spores through meiosis. Um, and the hope for that is there will be new combinations of genes that will float away because spores are good for transporting. And when they reach a new environment, there will be some combination that will be favorable to grow up and reproduce and pass on genes. So yeah, that's what happens. And in saltwater aquariums, I don't know a lot about this, but when things go sexual is really bad. Rico, for you, when things go sexual, I'm assuming is pretty good. That's a good night. But if you had a saltwater aquarium, you would be very unhappy that your stuff went sexual. So coral will it doesn't do alternation of generations, but it can still be stimulated to do sexual reproduction. But all of these algae, they can go sexual too, and they will all of a sudden the algae will release a bunch of spores. Coral, when it goes sexual, it release a bunch of sperm and eggs, and that will really foul your water. And that's bad. You have to do like big water changes to get rid of that. And it's hard to know what will trigger these things going sexual, but it's usually in response to some instability in the environment. It's in some way unhappy. So its response to being unhappy is to just have sex. So yeah. All right. So starving causes things get sexual. Is that what I'm hearing? Yeah. Depending on the organism, that's how you make yeast go sexual. And it really depends, but it is really a strategy to get new combinations of genes. That's the point of sex. What a fun guy. So dinner dates are a bad idea. Well, I mean, animals play by different rules, right? I mean, there's other reasons to have sex, but ultimately, the point of sex is meiosis and fertilization. Everything else is just window dressing. But as a geneticist, that's it. Sex is just meiosis and fertilization, making the sperm and eggs and putting the sperm and eggs together. Everything else doesn't really matter to me. It's just a waste of money. Wow. Are you a single man, Tim? Could be why. I'm just saying. You should cook for your lady. She would like that. All right. I simply adore the look of terrestrial mosses with sporophytes. Don't ask me why, but I find it to be so lovely. They are very pretty. And actually, so when I set up my terrariums, I bought a ton of moss, and I bought it dried, and I had to rehydrate it. And once it's rehydrated, like you have to grow it. And I put a bunch of substrate down in like a plastic bin, like like a sweater box, and then I spread the moss out on it, and it's got sporophytes. that have grown out of it, which are pretty cute. And the terrariums I made, they had sporophytes in them. So yeah, I think they're cool too. Mosses are underappreciated. I like mosses, but I hate aquarium mosses. I hate aquarium mosses. I hate them so much because they get everywhere. Agreed. Perennial and annual flowers take away all of the spotlight. Yeah, and the reason for that is because they can live in so many more environments. Mosses really have to live where there's constant moisture, and they're never going to get very big because they have no vasculature. So hornworts, yeah, hornworts are kind of they're a relative of ferns. And so they have a sporophyte generation and a gametophyte generation too. But the dominant form in that, I believe, is the sporophyte generation. I don't know a ton about hornwort. Have I ever grown hornwort? I don't know if I have. Everyone make sure you like and subscribe to Kelly. So lichen is maybe we'll talk about lichen sometime. Who knows? That is a symbiotic organism of a fungus and an algae that are living happily together. So when I was a kid, I took a cruise of Crater Lake in Oregon, and the park ranger said how you can remember it as Freddie Fungus and Alice Algae got married, but now their relationship is, took a liking to each other, but now their relationship is on the rocks. Ha ha ha. So, I don't know what we're talking about. Thank you, Kelly, for showing us the diversity of development and reproduction throughout the natural world. Yeah, and there's some variations of that. We didn't even talk about insects have some kind, hymenopteran insects, so like bees, wasps, they do some different things. Worms do some different things. They don't have like a prominent gametophyte and sporophyte generation, though. They don't do that in animals, but they do their own weird things with ploidy. We need to get out of our diploid-centric boxes and embrace nature and all of its varying evolutionary strategies. Yeah, stop it with the diploid supremacy. Well, I mean, there's a reason diploids are the supreme multicellular organisms on Earth, and that's because it is ultimately a more effective strategy. Having that extra copy really saves your bacon. Isn't Pellia in relation to Sesvasartang? No, because Pellia is a liverwort and Sesvasartang is actually a fern. So they are not related. They're pretty distantly related, actually, even though they do look the same. I'm terrified there's going to be a comprehensive exam on everything at the end of the semester. I mean, you should be studying, Stephen. You should be studying for your life. There should be study groups. You should be making flashcards. You should be taking notes. Lady Rorschach says, love me some ferns. Some of my favorite plants, especially maiden's hair fern and rabbit's foot fern. Those are very pretty ferns. And you live in the Pacific Northwest, Lady Rorschach. There are great ferns there. I mean, because it's very damp. And dampness is key for ferns. Stephen, the only question on the test is how much did Tim's topic suggest? I mean, last week's topic was pretty good, Tim. You did good last week. You're getting better. You're improving. Which, by the way, if you would like me to do a topic, let me know. I mean, I have some topics I'm thinking about doing. I'll probably do some sex topics because I enjoy doing those. But yeah, if there's anything you want me to talk about, let me know. You can hit me up on the Discord. I'm sure some mod will put a link for that. Or you can email me, or you can Facebook message me, or you can hit me up on my Instagram, or you can just hit me up in some stream. But yeah, I love having topics. So Skitty notices, I want some of the ferns you can eat. The fiddleheads, yes. There are some edible ferns. So when the sporophyte, so that's the dominant generation, first starts growing up, when it sends up the frond, it makes a tight called a fiddlehead. So if you want like the headstock on a violin looks like that tight scroll. In the spring, those start popping up and they're edible. You have to know which fern to take it from. Not every fern is going to taste good. They do taste really good. They taste like asparagus. And if you ever see them in like the farmer's market or something, or you know how to forage for them, they're very good. They only come out in early spring. And you only find them in woodlands because ferns are only in damp areas. Lady Rorschach says, yes, I've always wanted to try them. You should look at the farmer's market around where you live because I bet you'll see them. Lots of ferns in the Pacific Northwest. Very important question. Are you helping grade the exams? I mean, is Tim my TA? I don't know. I used to have TAs. Stephen, I was sworn to not answer that type of question. I mean, because he could probably be bought. I mean, if you send him some fancy shrimp, I mean, yeah. So I would like to hear Jake pronounce this Wassertang. So Jake, fun thing about Jake leaves for Germany actually on Saturday. He'll be there for a week. I thought about going with him, but I don't know. It's just cold and snowy there, and he's in a small town in Germany. He's being sent for work. But Jake does speak German. He's been doing Duolingo German for over 1,000 days straight. And he's gotten really good. And I asked him how to pronounce it, and he said Wassertang. But he didn't say it with quite the zest that I do, which is a little disappointing. I don't think he's that excited about it. Getting Nona says, Tim and I took notes. So far, we learned it's not worth taking a date out to eat if you want to get lucky. Starvation is not the only reason to do sex. I mean, humans cannot reproduce without it. We cannot just bud off a clone. Okay. There's no asexual reproduction for humans. So, different strategies. Tim says, can we take any of those non-vascular plants and toss them into a blender to mass propagate? Yes, you can. It's actually a thing that people do for growing moss outdoors. You take like a moss, like if you want to, like, let's say you have like a paved area, like with stone pavers, and they have like little cracks between them, and you want the little cracks to have moss growing on them. What you can do is you can take some moss and you can put it in a blender with buttermilk or yogurt, and you can make a slurry, and then you just paint that where you want the moss to grow. And apparently that works. And I guess Simply Betta did a video where she tried it. I don't know if she had success or not, but yeah, I mean, they will reproduce asexually, so it should work. Not saying it will work and they get contaminated. I think that's why the buttermilk is used, because so the bacteria in the buttermilk cultures kind of outcompete any other bad fungi or molds from attacking it. My guess is why the buttermilk is used, but it's kind of an old method for growing moss outside. So I've never tried it though. Yeah, and getting noticed as yes, and brush them onto things. Yeah. So Lady Rorschach says, I believe you buy crowns to cultivate fiddlehead ferns as opposed to seeds. Yes. So they don't make true seeds. True seeds are only in gymnosperms and angiosperms. So gymnosperms are like conifers. So like pine trees or balsam fir or Douglas fir. Okay, those are gymnosperms. Angiosperms would be most of the plants on Earth, like apple trees or bacopa, or I mean, just name a plant. It's probably an angiosperm. Corn. Yeah, you do buy ferns as fronds because propagating the spores is pretty tricky. Getting those gametophytes to grow up, it's pretty much impossible. So usually, what you do is you split up a clump of ferns like with a shovel, and that's how you would plant that. So yeah, just the crown of it. So Lady Rorschach mentions the ostrich fern is a species of fiddlehead fern that is most often consumed. Yes. My dad has a bunch of those growing in his yard. I've had the fiddleheads from that. They're very tasty. They grow in pretty much all temperate environments. So they're Osmunda ferns is the species. So Crypt Keeper says Getty-Nona. Yes, that is correct. Rico says German bees go Steiner. I mean, you heard it there first, people. Okay, Lady R says pretty much anything that can flower is an angiosperm. Yes, if it flowers, it's an angiosperm. That is the definition. A flowering plant is an angiosperm. They can be traced back in evolutionary history as far back as the Jurassic Age and what we now know in modern day China. Yes, the first angiosperms were primitive, were like magnolias, which are one of my favorite plants. They're so beautiful. They smell so nice. Those are very ancient angiosperms, or tulip trees. Liriodendron is the species name, tulip trees. Those are really pretty too. Someday those will bloom again, but it is so cold up here. It will be a while. When I was down in Louisiana, though, I saw magnolias starting to bloom in January. Did my heart some good. All right, about the blender or the date. Make your date dinner. Feed your date. It's going to help. Okay, Lady R says there is definitely a strong correlation with the evolution of pollinating insects and conjugation with the evolutionary development of angiosperms. Yes, they co-evolved. So there was kind of an arms race going on, and there's a famous example of that Darwin found of a hawk moth. So there was this orchid that had like a really, really long throat to it. And so the nectar, which is what insects are trying to eat, is like way at the bottom of this long plant. And so he knew just from looking at the flower that there had to be an insect with a very long proboscis, or really long nose, to reach into that flower to get the nectar and to transport pollen out of it. And there's a hawk moth. So pretty cool. So Lady R says it's amazing to find out many of these insect pollinators have a terrestrial ancestor. I am not an entomology expert, but I believe that bees and wasps originated from an ancestor. So bees and wasps and ants are all hymenopteran insects, which are all social insects, and they have their own interesting life cycle because the worker bees are all females and they're actually all haploid. And the soldier bees are the only males. The diploid is the queen, and the diploid is the one who does meiosis to make sperm and eggs to mate with the males, which the drones are. There aren't many of those to make the eggs. And the unfertilized eggs are the haploids, and those are the worker bees. All right. Lady Rorschach says, Kelly, can we expand this into a presentation on the evolutionary correlation between insect pollinators and angiosperms? Sure, we can do that. That's actually a really cool topic because, all the diversity of flowers we have and the diversity of insects. So insects are the most successful animals on Earth. And that's because they've kind of been in this evolutionary arms race with plants. So to become more and more specialized, and it's a really cool thing. So it's kind of they've really driven each other. Talk dirty plants to me. I mean, you do have to grow your plants in dirt. Corn is the only seed that must be planted to germinate. I don't know what you mean by that. don't know what you mean by that. You can germinate corn just like on a paper towel. I mean, and there are other plants that not sure what you mean by that. All right. Happy birthday, Dee Dee. Lots of Dee Dee birthday greetings. All right. Paul says tetraploid in ornamental plants generally makes flowers to leaves to stems larger, thicker, and more robust. Yes. And that's called polyploid advantage. So tetraploid means there's 4 copies. So if you stick 2 diploids together, you get a tetraploid. Um, there are some plants that are like have like 32 copies even. So I don't even know what that would be called. There's some ferns that have just huge genomes. Lilies are huge polyploids. They have huge chromosomes. Their chromosomes are so much bigger than ours, and it's because of polyploidy. And it does give advantage to plants. It makes them more robust. Ada Rorschach says, we raise a tiny wild variety of strawberries, and they are just proliferate over the summer. They are packed with so much flavor for such a tiny little fruit. Yeah, those do taste really, really good. They're not as big, and they're not really great for commercial production because they don't have a very big yield overall, like of pounds of fruit. But they do taste good. They're another thing you can grow. Those heirloom varieties are really cool. Oh, thank you, Fish Dreams. Thank you. I do really love my takes. All right. So what is it when a lizard grows a tail back? So, the very first live stream I did, we talked about something called potency. So I think we did. So a stem cell is what's called a totipotent cell, or it's a pluripotent cell. So it's one cell can take on lots and lots of fates and turn into anything, whereas a cell that is differentiated can only turn into that. So like a liver cell is differentiated. If it divides, it can only be another liver cell. Okay. But if you have a stem cell, it can turn into a variety of different tissues. And there are developmental changes that happen that lock a cell into a fate where it can no longer do that. And with humans and with, more with mammals, their cells get locked into fates. So we do have some stem cells in our body. So for instance, in our bone marrow, that can divide and that can turn into like a few different types of blood cells. Okay, so it has some potency, but that's it. Whereas like with lizards, their cells have lots of potency. So if you cut them, they can grow a new tail because they're not locked into a fate. Whereas if you cut off my arm, those arm cells, they don't know how to grow a new arm anymore because they're differentiated. So it's we don't quite know all the changes that happen and how we strip that away. So like the ultimate thing would be taking like a cell from like my hand and stripping all those modifications away from it and turning it back into something like a zygote where it can turn into anything. So I could just grow myself a new liver or I don't know, I'd like new lungs. I have crappy lungs, so something like that. And that's still kind of a big area of research. But lizards they maintain that because their cells aren't as locked into fates as ours are. Jealous of my French onion soup? You should make yourself a batch. It's so good and it freezes really well. And then what you do is you take a baguette and you slice it up and you put that in the freezer. So you're just ready to go. All you have to do is keep the cheese in the fridge and then bam, in 10 minutes time, you can have French onion soup. It's really good. You don't just look at pictures of rashes for fun, Kelly. No, I don't. I was not one of those professors there. And there are a certain kind of biology student who really, really wants gross pictures. And they are students that become doctors and nurses. But I I'm not that person. All right. So specifically, these species have an ability to regenerate limbs through a genetic overdrive called the Wnt pathway. So the Wnt pathway is really complicated. It's actually a whole network. It's not just the Wnt pathway. It's so much more complicated than that. But Wnt is a gene that is it's involved in a lot of development. It's very complicated. Paul says, I believe there's a huge fungal organism in the temporal rainforest of Washington state that is currently the title holder. I'm not surprised because the last I heard about that Michigan thing, it was a long time ago. So I'm not surprised that something has broken the record. Um, yeah, there's just so little we know about fungi because it's all beneath the surface. I mean, you'll see like a mushroom and that's like the apple on the tree. It's so little of the actual organism. Silver Creek says, yeah, I came in the right time. Sex talk at night. Woo! Paul says, after Hurricane Florence blew through here a few years ago, all the spring flowering trees and shrubs flowered because the storm stressed them so much that they wanted to ensure the next generation. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that. Desert plants, they kind of do the opposite in that the rainfall triggers them to flower because it's a time when they can finally have seeds germinate. You need water to germinate seeds. You can't germinate them without them. And so their strategy is to flower in response to a sudden rainstorm. It's really quite beautiful when that happens. All right. Lots of people saying hi. Coral works as lichen are a sort of like a terrestrial coral. Yeah, kind of, because coral are also a symbiotic organism, but they're a symbiosis of an animal and a photosynthetic algae. So kind of, but lichen are a fungus and an algae. But yeah, symbiosis. We will do a symbiosis. Um, we will do symbiosis because symbiosis is very cool. And it's something I'm very, very interested in. Nancy B is lurking while feeding the critters. Critters are hungry. Corework says, but I don't think any lichen creates the basis of an ecosystem in the same way. Some lichen benefit from other ecosystem creators, like the longleaf pine, though. Yeah, I mean, if you live in a very, very damp environment, like I just visited Louisiana, there is a lot more lichen on the trees because it's the swamp down there. And like when I've gone to the Pacific Northwest, they have a lot more lichens. I will say that like on rocks, the lichens kind of are the basis of that community because they can actually secrete acids to break down the stone and make the minerals in it accessible for other organizations. So they kind of are a keystone in that. So it's a really small ecosystem, a rock, but important nonetheless. All right, Steve-O says, I got a question, Kelly. Probably knows the answer too. Will latex gloves affect your tank in any way? The fish plants corals. As far as I know, there are none of the fish are affected by latex. It's mostly just, are you allergic to latex? If you're allergic to latex, you should not use latex gloves. But if you're okay with it, I think it's fine to use. Certainly with your corals, you want to cover your skin with something because a lot of those corals sting. You don't want that in your life. You could also use nitrile gloves. Those are very inert. So I think you'd be okay with either one. They're not going to hurt your fish or your corals or certainly not your plants or your fish. Silver Creek says, I'd ace this exam. Let's go. No copy though. There is a quiz at the end. Better take your notes. Oh, Fish Dream says, love the genetics topic. Genetics is my very favorite thing in the whole world to teach because I'm a geneticist. So I try, Everything I teach does kind of end up going back there, at least a little bit. Mhm. All right, Lady Rorschach says, I wish I could source them. We're talking about the fiddlehead ferns, but my local farmer's market sucks. Oh, that sucks. I have to travel north for the better farmers markets. Yeah, you got to find some of those because they are delicious. But you could also learn to forage them yourself. Get yourself some good guidebooks or go out with someone more experienced. I'm sure that you could forage them and they're delicious. Another cool thing you can look for in the spring, morel mushrooms. They're my favorite. I have done a lot of foraging for morels and also ramps, which are like a wild onion. Pretty tasty. You can find those too in the spring. So lots of good stuff. So no chance that another Tommy grew from that missing finger. No, unless Tommy is a salamander and has not told us. He doesn't look like it. Maybe he's an axolotl. We can't say for certain. We just don't know. He says, God, I hope not, Stephen. The world could not handle my crazy twice over. I mean, think how many water changes you could get done, though, if there were two of you. Paul says, Lady Rorschach, fiddlehead sauteed in butter with a little garlic. Yummy. I mean, they are really tasty. They taste like asparagus, and asparagus is delicious. Coreworks says, I find Java Winnebago usually buds a little clone leaf and roots off more than its spores. I don't know what Java Winnebago is. Tim says, I love fiddleheads. They make some good beer. Oh, we're probably talking about the vegetable and not the brewery. My bad. Oh, Tim, you and your fancy ass beers. I have no patience for fancy beers. Paul says ostrich fern is a very aggressive grower if it likes where it's planted. Yeah, no kidding. My dad actually, so he has a patch of those and he actually mows the edges of them to keep them from invading too much. They're very aggressive. If you live in a dry climate, though, they're probably not going to do that well for you. But it rains in the Midwest. It's not really an issue. Nathan says, I've never heard of that blah 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 plant before ever. Then Crip told me about it. Now it's all I ever hear. Did you mean Sasvassertong? Say it. It's fun to say. Sasvassertong. Hang on. All right. Lady Rorschach says, I love magnolias for sure. They're so pretty and they smell so good. And like, I know that spring has finally started when the magnolias bloom and I can finally feel good again because I am not happy right now, people. The winter is killing me. I'm very depressed. I need to see the sun and I'm actually going to Costa Rica in, let's see, very soon. I think 2 weeks. Let's check the calendar. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And then I can finally like blast my brain with some sunshine and I can feel good again because the winter is hard on me. I got a little bit of Louisiana that helped a bit, did make me feel better, but Costa Rica is really going to reset my brain. Hi, Kenny E. Hi, hey, I hope you guys are feeling better. I know you guys have been sick, and I know especially Danny was really sick, so I hope you guys are feeling better. Sketty notices, fun fact, the tulip tree is Indiana state tree. Yes, it's very pretty. You should Google a picture of it. It's a really, really nice plant. Maybe I'll Google it for you. I could do that. Let's see. New tab. Sending it over here. Hang on. I think I lost you guys. Where are you? Did I shut down the stream? Is it still going? I can't find you. This is weird. Stop sharing. I lost the stream. Oh, there it is. Okay. Oh, that was scary. I don't even know what happened. Add new tab to the right. Okay. So let's see. Let's Google tulip tree. I'm not a professional streamer, guys. And images. All right. Okay, so let me share this. Share screen. Share screen. All right, that's a tulip tree. If you've ever seen the flowers that look like that before, they're really pretty. And yeah, when you are taking a walk in the woods in Indiana, you'll see just lots and lots of those. It's sometimes called a tulip poplar. There's another one. Yeah, so that's what it looks like in the fall. It gets nice and yellow. Go away. But the flowers they're really pretty. And you'll see like the forest floor will just be littered with these flowers everywhere when you go to a park in Indiana. So that's a tulip tree. All right, let's stop sharing that. All right, so Lady Rorschach says, same evolutionary strategies were adapted by hummingbirds with their long tongues. Yes, and bats. Bats are also pollinators. So of night blooming flowers, which are kind of cool. Paul Zotero says, flowering almonds and camellias are popping up here. Magnolias are starting to break bud. Sigh. So flowering almonds and camellias won't grow up here. It's too cold, especially the camellias. Those are so pretty. So camellias are in the same genus as tea, like the tea you drink. And they're so pretty. We can't grow them here. It's too cold. And it's so long. Our magnolias probably don't bloom really until May. So long from now. Getting Nona says, I have Anne and Susan magnolia. Ooh, that's a fun cultivar. There's some really pretty ones. Coralwork says, don't some of them become diploid when the queen disappears with like termites, but not bees? It can make a new queen, but the only way to become a diploid is for two haploid gametes to unite. So if a colony loses its queen, they're always raising the next generation of their queen. This is from what I understand. I'm not an entomologist, but they will raise another queen and they'll start to give it what's called royal jelly. So it has to be a fertilized egg. So it's not a haploid, it's a diploid, and they'll feed it the royal jelly, which will help it develop into a queen. Also, like if it lost a queen, one colony can join another colony, and so it'll have a queen. Lady R says, our camellias should be blooming next month or so. The magnolias are starting to bud too. Sigh. Sigh. Look at Vibes coming in hot. I love it. I love it. Yeah, hit the like, people. What the heck? I need my likes. How do I know if you liked me or not? Dun, dun, dun. Dun, dun, dun. A lot of chatting Gina's here. Yay. Hi, Gina. Okay. I don't know what I was clarifying, but you're welcome. Yellowstone said, just found out China has a spy balloon above Montana. Well then, I don't know what to do about that. So Joe, he had a heart attack. Joe Shrimp Shack Joe had a heart attack. I did not hear this. Vibes is teasing me that I'm 3 wrinkles behind. In my defense, I did a lecture at the beginning. Like, it took time. But yeah, I hope Joe feels better. So Paul Sotero mentions the Spanish moss. So we do not have Spanish moss up north, but that is not a true a true moss. It's actually it's an epiphytic plant. It's bromeliad. So if you've ever seen bromeliads before, Spanish moss is actually related to those. It's a tillandsia. So air plants are tillandsias. That's Spanish moss. Steven told me that you're not supposed to bring Spanish moss in your house, though. It has some pest in it. I can't remember what the pest is. Like, is it going to give me chiggers or something? I don't know. Something terrible. I didn't know this. Like, I'm just like, oh, look, Spanish moss. Because, we don't have it in the north, and I just wanted to pet it. But apparently that's going to give me some pestilence. Gina points out to get food grade you mean powderless gloves. Yes, get food grade ones. Your tank should be fine. Gina would know. Gina is an expert in handling saltwater tanks. And she says you can use either nitrile or latex. Like if you're allergic to latex, please do not use latex gloves. Like, yeah. So Coral Work says morels grow around sugar pine and madrone trees in my experience. Depends on where you live. So I used to hunt morel mushrooms in Iowa a lot. And I used to look around maples. That was a really good strategy for me, was maples. But also dying or dead elms were like the heyday of morel mushrooms. You're not going to see really any elm trees anymore because back when I was a baby a million years ago, they all got Dutch elm disease and died. So, yeah, I don't really see those. But if you do find a dead or dying elm, it's a good place to look for morels. But otherwise, I found maples are good in my neck of the woods. Yeah, I don't know what a madrone tree is. We don't have them in Iowa or Indiana. Madrona. It might be madrona. I do not know this tree. I do not know it. All right. Gina says silver, but if there are two of you, one could concentrate on the farm, the other the fish tanks. Think how many chickens you could raise. I mean, don't count this out. Like, I've always felt like if there was an extra Kelly, like one could be washing the dishes and one could be lounging on the couch listening to live streams. All right. Coral Work says grows at higher elevation. I think there's something to do with ocean breezes or something. I don't know. I think you're from you're from the Pacific Northwest, and I do not know all of your flora because I'm a lifelong Midwesterner, and it's very different here. Ah, da dum da da. All right. Tulip tree is also Tennessee's state tree. I had a few at my last house. They're a very pretty tree. They're very nice. Nancy B says, I saw the petals for a couple of years before I knew where they were coming from. Yeah, I know. I've seen like the ground. There's not as many of them growing in Iowa. I'm not really sure why that is. So I wasn't as familiar with them either. I'd heard of them, but once I moved here, there were just so many of them. And yeah, you'll see the ground just littered with them. Like Matt says, feeding the royal jelly. Boy, if I had a nickel every time I've said that. I just deliver the information and you interpret it. That's that. All right. Paul says the National Arboretum has developed camellias hardy to zone 5-6. If the winter is in the name, winter stars from that group. I'm gonna have to check that out because I love camellias. They're so beautiful. And I'm zone 6A here, so I could totally grow those. Thank you. I will look that up. Yeah, that's really cool. Thank you. Stephen confirms, yes, chiggers. But I'm not actually sure if they hang out in the trees in large numbers. I mean, you're just looking out for my safety. I don't want to get bit by chiggers. Jake's grandma was always convinced like everything would give him chiggers. There's really not chiggers in Indiana. Like, I don't know what she was talking about, but he was just terrified of chiggers as a kid. So, all right, Bunny looked up these madrone trees. They are lovely, beautiful bark, leaves, and flowers and fruit. Have never heard of it before. We're all gonna have to Google this. So the common name is the strawberry tree. Oh, I have heard of this before because of its fruit. It only likes growing in the Pacific Northwest or England. Our climate is not like that. I have heard of those before. Yeah. Okay, good to know. We're all learning things. And he says, Coral, oh, the pics I was seeing showed something that looked like a reddish peach. Maybe that's the wrong tree. The Pacific madrone tree. They grow groups of berries. I mean, we could just look this up. Like, we have a couple minutes. Madrone tree. All right, so let's share this. All right, so this is the fruit of the madrone. Okay. We do not have this in the Midwest. So Pacific madrone is so Arbutus menzies. Okay, it's an arbutus. Okay, it's a dramatic, unique tree that provides beauty to the landscape all year long. It does have really cool looking fruits. Are those fruits edible? The berries make good cider and were often dried and pounded into meal. You can also brew a tea from the leaves and bark. Wow. Yeah, I do not know this. I do not know this plant. So that's cool. All right, we all learned a new thing. That's cool. Steven says chiggers go straight for the genitals and they itch like a mofo. You know, you guys have a lot of really nasty pests down there. We don't have fire ants where I live. That's not a thing. The frost kills them. Bunny says chiggers live in weeds, tall grasses, berry patches, and wooded areas, but really not as far north as where I live. But yes, they're awful in Texas. Don't roll on the ground. I mean, you guys have fire ants too. So, yeah. All right. So, okay. And so the madrone, this makes sense. They require a forest fire to germinate the seed. So, kind of like lodgepole pine. That's cool. So, I learned a new thing. Wow, look at this. I made it to the bottom of the chat. You always tease me about how I'm 25 Ricos behind. But look at that. I made it. And Stains Dust just came in. Welcome. You're just fashionably late. So yeah. Anyways, we'll kind of wrap this up. Chattanooga Ed is streaming after this. If mods could drop a link, we all want to go say hi to Ed. Make sure you put hashtag Fat Kitty because he needs to know that Fat Kitty is saying hi to him because, you know, Fat Kitty and Nico and Baby Cat are all friends. So Paul says I should plant a service berry. They grow all in my area. Yes, they do. I have a really tiny yard, so I can't plant that much. But yeah, they're really, really nice. So Gina, you guys have fire ants down there. You have them in St. Louis, not as many as Texas. No, they have not made their way here. It's but climate be a changing. It is getting warmer here. The winters are milder, so they may make it. Yeah, but thank you everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you to my mods. Thank you everyone who chatted. Thank you for asking questions. I really appreciate all of you. And thank you replay crew. You know, leave a comment. I always answer all my comments. If you want to leave a comment after the stream anyways, I do answer all of them. But thank you so much. Go to Chattanooga Ed after this and have a good night. Bye.